Hey, welcome. My name is John Murphy, and I run digital strategies here for the Citrus County Chronicle. The Citrus County Chronicle, for more than 130 years, we've been bringing you local news, those issues that are important to you, our local community. And how do we do that? Well, we're here. We're in the community. We've got reporters right in our community, going to county candidate forums, interviews with candidates, that sort of thing. But you know what we're not good at? We're really not good at statewide amendments. And so in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our guest speaker that I brought in here today to talk to us about amendments, because in November, actually, you might even have your ballot right now. Your vote by mail ballot might already be in your sitting on your kitchen table, and everything from the president right down to the dog catcher and everything in between is on that ballot, including 6 constitutional amendments. And as I said, we're not constitutional amendment experts, but Frank Walker. Frank, thank you for being with us. Frank is the Executive Vice President of Government Affairs and Policy for the State Chamber of Commerce. Frank's a great guy, so thank you first and foremost for being here. Appreciate the heck out of it. And he has spent a lot of years up in D.C., 11 of them, and you survived. So that was good. And now he works with the State Chamber on policy, walking the halls of Tallahassee, knows and understands the process like no other person I've ever spoken to. So certainly could help us better understand that process, as well as maybe a little bit about those amendments. So Frank, welcome.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm thrilled to be here. Always appreciate the partnership. I'm thinking about the Citrus County community down there, given some of the storms of late, but storms or not, we've got a big election right in front of us here on November 5th, and thrilled to talk about some of these constitutional amendments because, man, oh man, are they important, because they're effectively permanent.
They are. So let's talk about that, right? Like, you let's just start right there. You mentioned, you think about our U.S. Constitution of the United States. That document's 230 years old, and it's been amended exactly 27 times, right?
Right.
Our Constitution, the state of Florida, has had multiple constitutions. The current version of our Constitution enacted, I think, 1970, and it's been
1968, right?
Yeah, 1968, and it's been effectively edited 144 times. So how does that happen?
Yeah, it's true. And look, there's 5 different ways to amend what is really, I think, one of the easiest state constitutions to amend in the country. 3 of them aren't utilized that often. There's this thing called the Constitution Revision Commission. It's pretty unique to Florida, where 37 unelected individuals are appointed to basically have carte blanche to put proposed amendments before voters. That happens every 20 years. We just had one back in 2018. In 2028, we'll have a Legislative Taxation and Budget Commission. It's a similar process to the CRC, but more focused in on tax and budget issues, obviously. And then the Constitutional Convention route, which very unusual. So really, there's 2 primary ways to amend the Constitution. One is through the joint legislative resolution process. That's if the legislature, gets 60% of both the Senate and the House to agree on something. They can bypass the governor's veto pen and put a proposal directly in front of voters in November. The other way, which seems to be more and more used, and some might even say abused, is the so-called citizens initiative process, which I think probably more accurately is called the paid petition process, because we can kind of get into how that process works, but a lot of money behind it, oftentimes from those outside of our state, seeking to kind of circumvent the democratic process, the legislative process, and go directly to the ballot with proposals.
Yeah, and so, and this is, my personal opinion, but you look at the citizen initiative route, often that's almost those legislative issues that legislatures were unwilling to legislate on.
Sure, and it's interesting because there's sometimes some bemoaning of that, and this is called a necessary route to get the people's will done. Well, I'll remind folks, we have elections every 2 years in Florida, and if the legislature is not exercising the will of the people, there's an opportunity to vote those guys or gals out and bring in the folks that will. It's also interesting when you think about when the citizens initiative or paid petition process was started. It was back in 1968 with that rewrite of the Constitution we're living under today. And I think if we returned it to the process that those framers envisioned, which was Floridians going door to door, neighborhood by neighborhood, having real grassroots campaigns rather than Like one amendment, we've seen over $125 million spent on it already. It's kind of become a shell of what it originally was intended to be. And that's why I think the citizens initiative label is a little bit misplaced and paid petitions probably a little bit more accurate.
I would agree. So let's dive into the amendments, right? So if we can, we'll just walk through them kind of one by one. We'll start with the first one. Kind of give us, if you could, just kind of what is that amendment? If I voted yes for that amendment, what does that mean to me as a citizen of the state of Florida? If I voted no to that amendment, what does that kind of look like for us? And the first one is one of those legislatively created amendments.
That's right. It was put on the ballot back in 2023, actually, during that legislative session, and it deals with partisan school board elections. So currently in Florida, your school board candidates do not run underneath a party label, Republican, Democrat, no party affiliation, Green Party, Libertarian Party, whatever it might be. And back in 1998, during a previous Constitution Revision Commission, that CRC put an amendment before voters to establish that nonpartisan system. Prior to that, we had partisan school board elections in Florida. So what this would seek to do is basically undo that 1998 amendment and return partisan labels to school board elections. Proponents would say more information is better for voters. Knowing whether a candidate identifies with one party or not provides them additional information as they make their decisions around increasingly impactful positions like school board members. Opponents would probably say we don't need politics around our school boards. I wish that we could get that genie back in the bottle, but I'm not sure that's possible. So it really would go into effect starting with the 2026 election cycle. So a vote yes on the amendment says, I want to see an R or D next to that candidate's name. Vote no would say current system's fine. Let's keep the status quo. And it is interesting, John, when you look at around the country, you do have a lot of southeastern states that have partisan school board elections. So if you look at Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, they either have full-blown partisan elections or what we call hybrid opportunities. So it depends on the school district. We've got 67 counties. Each one is their own school district. So under that hybrid system, different counties could make their own decisions. But outside the Southeast, it really is a little bit unusual. Of our 50 states, I think there's less than 40 that have any sort of partisan opportunity around their school board elections. But this isn't an amendment to sleep on. I mean, these are important positions, not just for communities, but really the business community as well. When we think about the education of our children, that's the future workforce that we're going to be relying on to keep Florida competitive long term.
Absolutely. All right, so moving on to the Second Amendment. This is one that I don't know if I spoke with 10 people, they could even tell me what the Second Amendment they're going to see on their ballot is, because it just seems like apathy to it. I guess that's why we're doing this today, too, to kind of help folks understand what it looks like.
So the Second Amendment that you'll see on the ballot, Amendment 2, is the right to hunt and fish. This would do basically exactly what it says. It would enshrine in the Constitution the right to hunt and fish in Florida. I think that when you look around the nation, up until 1996, there was only one state in the Union, Vermont, all the way back in 1777, had a constitutional right to hunt and fish in its constitution. Since 96, we've seen 22 other states, along with potentially Florida in 2024, that have enshrined this right in their constitution. And I think that it's been kind of a proactive effort to get in front of potential legislative action to limit hunting and fishing. To be clear, though, this amendment would in no way constrain or limit the vested powers of the Fish and Wildlife Commission to set things like bag limits or hunting seasons, or the length of that fish that your daughter's got to get to before it can stay in the boat and doesn't have to go back in. So this one, I think, is relatively straightforward, and it does require a constitutional amendment because it's adding a right to each and every Floridian.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that too, because I will say that there's been some chatter that I've read about that the concern is that, well, does that strip FWC's empowerment to be able to regulate, as you said, bag limits, season limits, things of that nature, but that's not at all the case.
Right. It's not. It simply says that this is a right of Floridians. It does suggest that this is the preferred means of wildlife management, but again, no handcuffing or limitation of the Fish and Wildlife Commission to do what they do as experts best.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so Amendment 3 is one that if you've turned on your television anytime in the last 6 weeks, you've heard a thing or two about Amendment 3.
Sure. This was when I suggested that certain amendments had a lot of money behind them. This is one of the ones I was talking about. I think we're over $125 million spent, over $100 million from one company. In fact, that's some serious coin to try and convince voters to do something. So this is the legalization of recreational marijuana amendment. It would kind of import those California, Colorado drug laws into Florida's Constitution. Would say anyone 21 and over, adults, could possess, purchase, and use marijuana products. It would not allow them to grow their own marijuana. You'd have to purchase that from kind of licensed entities. Currently, we have those medical marijuana treatment centers, and the belief is that more licenses would be available for others to acquire, cultivate, and ultimately sell that marijuana as well. But what it wouldn't also do is immunize folks from violations of federal law, because marijuana does remain illegal at the federal level, but this would be for state law only. I do think that, there's a lot of information out there about this amendment from both proponents and opponents. For the business owners out there, I would really encourage you to have your counsel and your lawyer to look closely at the lack of what we call time, manner, and use limitations. The way that some lawyers are reading this amendment is that unlike tobacco or medicinal marijuana, there would not be limitations on when, where, and how marijuana could be used. So does that mean it could be on public sidewalks, public parks, beaches? Could it even be in the lobby of a business or in the parking lot of a business? I think that's a big time unknown that I would encourage everyone who runs a business that could be impacted by this to take a really close look at.
Yeah, and a no vote on this leaves medical marijuana, leaves everything that we currently have in place. So if you are, utilizing marijuana through legal means and feeling positive effect from that through your medical issues that you're trying to address, this leaves all of that intact, correct?
That's absolutely right, John. No changes to the existing system. This just says 21 and older, you can have up to 3 ounces, which I heard a sheriff from over in Polk County the other day said was between 100 and 150 joints on your person at any time. So I think we've gone beyond the small amount of personal use, but that's what's being billed at is a legalization of personal recreational use.
Yeah, and just to put an exclamation point on it, I would just encourage folks to continue to do a little research. As you said, how did this initiative come about? This wasn't through, folks sitting around coffee tables at their local coffee shop deciding to do this. This was large multi-state companies coming in looking to put their stake in the ground, I guess.
Sure, that's exactly right. This was one of the so-called citizens initiative or paid petition amendments. The first 2 the legislature put on the ballot, but this was really one company that spent, like I said, over $100 million to not only get the signatures necessary, but then run what has been a pretty consistent and constant ad campaign. If you've missed one of their commercials, I'm envious of you because I've been exposed to a lot of them. So do your homework on this one. Do your homework.
Yeah. So a yes vote is going to introduce recreational marijuana. A no vote will keep our current system in place that we have.
That's correct.
Very good.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other amendment that is probably a lightning rod topic of conversation for lots of folks, but we want them to understand what a yes vote, what a no vote means, and that is the number 4, the right to abortion amendment.
Yeah, this is the amendment to limit government interference with abortion is its actual title. So this is another one that went through the Citizens Initiative or paid petition process, John, and it's really in reaction to some legislation. So Florida currently has a abortion ban in place for abortions after 6 weeks, with some exceptions for things like rape, incest, the health of the mother, etc. This would basically say that abortion would be available on demand in Florida up to the point of fetal viability. That's generally accepted to be around 24 weeks, but no definition in the amendment for an actual date cutoff. It would also say that abortion could be available at any point if a healthcare provider determined that it was in the interest of the mother, or the patient, I guess I should say. Also, healthcare provider, not defined in this amendment. So I think there's been some interesting conversation around, who would qualify under that. But this was really a reaction to the legislature's recent activity around this, and a lot of out-of-state money, as you can imagine, pouring in around this amendment. Not quite to the same level of Amendment 3, but this one, it's got some political ramifications as well. And that's always one of those things that we are interested about with amendments is, are we truly dealing solely with policy, or are there political turnout machinations being set in place as well? That's probably a bit of the skeptic of me coming out, but this one.
Well, it's probably your tenure walking the halls of DC and Tallahassee that give you that skepticism.
It took me longer than I expected to find the side door to that asylum, but I eventually made it back down to Florida by the grace of God. So, but yeah, that's this one. So with a no vote, we don't have any change to the current state of law here in Florida. With a yes vote, abortion up until fetal viability, or as dictated necessary by a healthcare provider.
Very good. Very good. So, the state of Florida, we have no sales, we have no income tax. We drive revenue through sales tax in a lot of ways. At the local level, ad valorem tax dollars drives a lot of things, and we have a number of exemptions already that are in place. And I'm not advocating for or against, just painting a picture, right? We already have a number of ways of people kind of reducing their ad valorem tax liability. But number 5, talked about homestead exemption, right?
Sure. So this one's a little complicated. So I'm going to try and do my best to not go way down into actuary and, kind of tax language too quick. But annual adjustments to the value of certain homestead exemptions. So to your point, John, if you own your home, currently under current law, there's a variety of exemptions to property taxes. The first is on the first $25,000 of the value of your home, and then there's an second exemption for the value from $50,000 to $75,000. So this amendment solely speaks to that second tranche, if you will, the $50,000 to $75,000, and it basically tags that exemption to inflation. So you think about if you've spent $1 in the past year, it's not worth what it was the previous year, or certainly not a decade ago or 50 years ago for certain. What this amendment does is set in process a kind of automatic escalator of the value of that exemption. So if the exemption today is $25,000, and let's say that the consumer price index, which is a measure of inflation, went up 5% next year, that would mean your homestead exemption, that $25,000 tranche, would increase to $26,500. So it would go up marginally. Not a ton of money immediately. I think proponents have said over time, this adds up as inflation kind of builds over a number of years and decades. There has been conversation about, well, what does this do to local governments who rely on those property taxes for their functions? So this amendment in no way would impact the school levies portion of your homestead exemption. So no impact there. What it would do, though, is hit that other kind of bucket of money that local governments benefit from with those property taxes. There was actually an estimating conference around what this would mean from a cost perspective, and they said first year, statewide, about $12 million. Over time, it could grow upwards, they said, over the next 5 or 6 years to more like $100, $120 million. So it would grow over time. They did write in a rider where if you're a fiscally constrained county, which about 29 of the counties around Florida are, I don't believe Citrus is at the
You're
moment.
Yeah.
Just to the north of you, that whole swath of the Big Bend is for sure. There would be a mechanism for the legislature to basically backfill any lost revenue to the state through appropriations. So a vote yes on this would basically say that second little part of your homestead exemption is going to get bigger if inflation goes up. A vote no says keep it exactly the same. Importantly, if we ever were to have deflation, wouldn't that be interesting? You wouldn't see your homestead exemption get smaller. So there is a floor set on it no matter what.
Yeah. If I was a betting man, I know where I'd bet this one would land.
It's interesting. So, John, we poll constantly at the chamber. You probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that. And this isn't a political program. I know this is more of a kind of civics, just the facts, Jack. But I don't know. I think that one will be interesting. I don't know that it's quite as certain as some things. We might bet a cup of coffee on that one if we were betting people. I know we're not, but we'll see.
And that brings us to our last one, and that is related to campaign finances. Again, this is a legislatively enacted amendment that we're seeing on the ballot. Tell us a little about that.
Sure. So this again would overturn a provision from that 1998 Constitution Revision Commission. So beginning in 1986, Florida through statute created a campaign public financing system. Basically, for certain offices, governor, lieutenant governor, ag commissioner, CFO, and attorney general, if those candidates agreed to certain terms around spending, they could qualify for matching and in some case super matching taxpayer funded campaign finance support. In 98, that was enshrined in the Constitution. There was actually an effort back in 2010 to repeal that and say we don't want to have any public financing of campaigns anymore. That ended up failing. It got just over 50%, but just to kind of foreshadow our next conversation, that was short of that 60% mark. But this one would say, I don't think I want any of my taxpayer dollars going into the campaign finance coffers for candidates of the governor's office or the cabinet. Proponents say get money out of politics, get public money out of politics. Opponents might say, well, are we going to push those who have less traditional means of funding available for their campaigns away from running? And does that diminish the talent pool of our candidates?
Yeah, so that would be an interesting one to see. So that kind of does bring us into if we can kind of round this out. You talk about the 5 different ways that initiatives get on the ballot. We have 2 being exampled here in this ballot, right? We've got 2 that were citizen initiatives. The other come out of the legislature because they're trying to change something that already is in the Constitution. So it has to kind of go through that route,
Correct.
that path, that process. But we also, when was it that we changed to the 60% majority? And talk to us about where we're at with these amendments.
Yeah, so 2004, it was right as I was cruising into D.C. for the first time. We all woke up as a state, and overnight we're the laughingstock. And it's because pregnant pigs.
Was that the pig year? Was that the pig year?
That was the pig year, yeah. Gestational
the
crates.
Pigs and the bullet train. Pigs and bullet trains.
Right. So pregnant pigs in our state's constitution. Usually you think constitutions are, the establishment of a system of government, inalienable rights of individuals that live within that government. And suddenly we've got pregnant pigs, and the late night talk shows had their first set of jokes written for them. So it was actually the Chamber of Commerce with some partners in the legislature and in the broader business community, and really, across Florida said, we've got to have more consensus and deliberation before we put what are effectively near permanent changes in our Constitution. So a constitutional amendment was passed to raise that threshold to 60%. I think since that point, we've also led some other changes to bring more transparency to the paid petition process, make sure there was more voter information available around things like cost estimates, for example, and financial impacts. But yeah, I think the idea was not to in any way make it impossible or harder to limit or amend the Constitution. The idea was to ensure that we were sure we wanted to do it as a state, because again, once those changes go in, very difficult for them to come out. It's not like the legislative process where you come back next year and you can run a technical amendment if new technologies become available or new information's come to light, or even, public opinions just changed, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe that's why the U.S. Constitution's been amended exactly 27 times, and ours a few more times than that.
Just a couple more. That's exactly right. Which is, it really does, double down on your point earlier, John, about how important it is for folks to get educated on these amendments. Unfortunately, a lot of folks will read that ballot title, and that'll make their decision yes or no. And I would tell you that the folks that put some of these things on the ballot are very good and sophisticated at what they do, and they're leading you in a certain direction. So do your research. We have a voter guide on the Florida Chamber website, flchamber.com, that goes through the business community's perspective on those amendments. And then on Amendment 3, like that one, I'd say in particular, really drill down. It would be hard for your average reader or listener to realize maybe that law enforcement, the sheriffs, for example, were opposed to that amendment based on some of the TV ads that you see. It might be difficult to find out that, the companies that wrote that amendment actually gave themselves liability protections in that amendment. So if their product's defective, you couldn't sue them for it. That time, manner, and use issue that we talked about isn't something that's discussed a lot in some of those TV ads. So really take the time to get yourself up to speed on this before you walk into that ballot booth on November 5th or before.
Appreciate that, Frank. And as you said, you and I, we both have this purview of kind of the local business community, but yet the reality is these constitutional amendments will have far-reaching implications into, that social norms that we enjoy and the quality of life that we enjoy in our communities, and it could change it one way or another, and we want to make sure we're paying attention.
That's absolutely right. And the last point I'll make is the rest of the country's watching Florida, per the usual. Florida becomes a bellwether when it comes to setting public policy, not just within our borders or our region, but nationwide. So if some of these amendments were to succeed, for example, that have qualified through the Citizens Initiative or paid petition process, the proponents of those amendments are going to take notice, and they're going to take those ideas out across the country and try their luck at other state constitutions, holding Florida up as the example of why they should do it.
Very good. One more time, Frank Walker, thank you so much for your time. One more time, what is that? If I want to dig a little deeper, I know the State Chamber has some resources. What's that website address?
Absolutely. www.flchamber.com. If you go to our political tab, you'll see the voter guide right there, the 2024 voter election guide. It's free. It's not behind a paywall. It's really meant to be a resource, not just for the business community, but all who live within our state.
Again, Frank, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Great. John, appreciate being with you. Take care.